You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole, coming at you from the just beautiful, just gorgeous landscape of Mustafar. We are sitting fireside because everywhere is fireside here, and we are going to be talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I am so excited for that. And with me, as she is just every single week, is the one, the only Inquisitor-S person, Christy Morris.
I don't even get a number?
How about we call you the first sister? We've never met the first sister.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. Okay, yeah, I'll take it.
There we go.
First sister Inquisitor.
Mm-hmm. And the one and only, we just call him Darth, John Mills.
Yes, I'm here. There you go.
Yes, you are.
I'm here.
And, I mean, Darth, it's just a really appropriate name for you.
I guess so. We're both bald, so that seems to be a requirement for Darth.
This is true. Although, yours didn't come from an intense burning on a lava planet, luckily. So.
No, a strange encounter with Nair, I guess, is probably what happened. So.
And it just stayed that way forever.
Nair does burn, though, just in case anybody was wondering.
That's what I've heard.
It's a chemical
I've
burn.
never tried it, but...
it sucks.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. Well,
not worth
you've learned something, kids. Don't use Nair on your head, and if you do, expect burning. So, but before we dive into Obi-Wan Kenobi there on Disney Plus, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We definitely appreciate you following us, subscribing to us, telling your friends about us, giving star ratings and reviews where possible, say on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or other places like that allow you to give reviews. We'd love to have you follow us over on social media at the 602 Club on Twitter. We're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. We're on Facebook with the entire network over at facebook.com/TrekFM. You can also find us online at trek.fm, and there's the listeners only discussion group called the Babel Conference you can join. And of course, we've got the website trek.fm where you can see all of the shows that we're doing here on the network. We'd also appreciate it if you went over to Patreon, patreon.com/TrekFM, and you can become part of the team. It is quite expensive to put all this together, and we need help from listeners just like you to make sure that keeps happening. So again, that's patreon.com/TrekFM. So I know both of you are very aware of the fact that when Disney first bought Lucasfilm, one of the biggest things that people clamored for was the idea of a Kenobi movie. And we had heard rumors that they were going to be doing a movie. In fact, not only would we be getting, we knew we were going to get Solo because that was announced, a Star Wars story. We were going to have Boba Fett, a Star Wars story. And we had Rogue One, a Star Wars story. We thought we were going to get Kenobi as a Star Wars story movie. And it didn't turn out like that. We didn't get a film. And I'm not blaming Solo for that because it wasn't really Solo's fault. I think it's more Disney's fault. And with their mismanagement of everything revolving around Solo. So they turned to the idea of doing Kenobi as a limited miniseries. We'll talk later about whether or not we'll get more. That's not the point of this section. What I really want to ask you both as we get into this, are you glad that this turned out to be a show and not a movie? Do you feel like that it was a better course for them to do this as a show? Would you still have maybe rather have them seen, 2.5, 3 hour Kenobi movie?
Hindsight is 20/20. And that's the thing is I can say now that, yeah, I probably would have preferred a 2.5 hour movie, even if it was released straight to Disney Plus. I didn't have a problem with the idea of it being a show. I didn't, I don't object to anything being a show. If you've got the material and you got the resources, go for it. Streaming, as we all believe, is the future. So, of course, it makes sense to make a show. But, I would say I would have expected a movie or a special movie event. And I would have also, if you put me in a time machine and I do all the other stuff that you're supposed to do with a time machine and I got one more trip left, I'd probably be like, hey, yeah, Kenobi should be a movie.
So I feel a little bit differently just because, of course, back before we knew it was going to be a series, I would have absolutely said, yes, I'd love for it to be a movie. I think now that we've seen this show in its entirety, it actually felt to me sort of like we got a movie because the episodes were so long and you get to explore a little bit more than you do in one condensed 2-hour movie. I felt. So I ended up liking it better being a limited series instead of a film. But definitely glad either way that we got this gap explained more between, Kenobi's time in the desert to then when we meet Alec Guinness's version.
I think I'm going to cut the difference between the two of you and say that I think that I wish that what we got were just longer episodes. So maybe it was like 3 2-hour episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And
the Sherlock approach, sure.
Yes, exactly. Or I would say more akin to, Christy, we just talked about Stranger Things, the first part of the final season where each episode is longer. Mm-hmm. We talked about this, John, when we talked about the Book of Boba Fett, how some of these stories in many ways really feel like the episodes would be better actually together, just because they kind of create, the first arc of the story, the second arc, and then the third arc. And, I kind of felt like that because, they released the first 2 episodes together with Kenobi, which I thought was a great choice because those 2 episodes created kind of like Act 1. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you had possibly maybe approached them more like that of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, like just a massive film, that then the editing in the episodes themselves would have been slightly different, and maybe would have enhanced the storyline in a way that I kind of think what you're kind of getting at, John, where it like I don't feel like there were really any episodes in the story which I felt were superfluous, like just didn't need to be there at all. But I did feel like that by cutting them into smaller episodes, it actually didn't work quite as well as I would have wanted it to. And again, when you approach something as like a 2-hour thing, your editing is different than when you're just approaching it as 2, 50-minute things. And I think that's where I can see how, with all the pieces we got, not asking him to rewrite anything or anything like that, I just, to my thought, I think the series would have been even better in that format.
Well, and I think that is what I'm getting at in a sense is when you sit down and you say, I'm going to make a 2 to 2.5 hour movie, it forces you to be brutally efficient with your storytelling.
Right.
And I think that is one of the challenges that revealed itself as the series went on, was that they weren't, to my eye, brutal enough with their choices in terms of,
sure,
okay, we got the point, let's keep moving and let's tell what's most important. And then I think by cutting it down like that, they would have exposed certain parts where they would have said, oh, you know what, we need a bridge scene here. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I enjoy the prequels so much, is Lucas, he's, the firm believer that you put it together in the editing room, and he would put stuff together and say, you know what, we need a scene right there. Okay, let's write that off really quick. Let's bring everybody back, shoot them against blue screen. Great, we got our scene now where these two characters are interacting, and that creates our bridge. And so the thing that is surprising to me for that is that I would think that a streaming property would lend itself to that ability to do that, to sort of play with it as you go along, sort of thing, and give you,
Sure.
because you're shooting digitally and you're putting the show together, you could get a really good sense of like, oh, you know what, we need to shore it up a little bit over here. So, and going back to Book of Boba Fett, same sort of puzzling sort of situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and I will say, one of the things that I felt like is that they kind of learned from the Book of Boba Fett in some ways, because this series did feel, I think, more cohesive as an entire story thread than what we got in the Book of Boba Fett, for sure. And in general, I'll let it slide here. I like the show better than the Book of Boba Fett, and just because I feel like a lot more of that worked. But I still feel like Christy, you and I talked about Stranger Things, right? And we mentioned how we felt like that show is probably the best show in streaming when it comes to creating arced television, and that they really put their stamp with that. I think the first season was like that specifically, and this fourth season, at least part one, absolutely felt like that. I still feel like a lot of shows are struggling to understand how to create these shows in the sense of like, okay, we have unlimited amount of time for every episode we want, but what's the best format to tell that in? And so I feel like sometimes shows get stuck in the idea, oh, we have to have just however many, like 6 to 9 45-minute episodes, instead of thinking truly outside the box, which is like, okay, what does this story need?
Right.
And we just do it like that because it doesn't matter. It's streaming. So, which leads me to a question for both of you, because one of the things that this show got rewritten, and one of the reasons it was rewritten is because they got the scripts and they felt like the story was way too similar to The Mandalorian, in the sense that Kenobi is protecting this young Skywalker from various threats, and it just felt very small, they felt like. And it wasn't as grand as they kind of wanted. And with those concerns, Favreau and Filoni looked at the scripts and they felt like the same thing too, and they just encouraged Deborah Chow and the writers to just go bigger, which is where I think one of the big places we got that was by them bringing in Vader and really making this show feel much more big. I mean, for lack of a better term. So I want to ask you guys about how do you feel like that was a better choice too for them to stop, think, and then go bigger or go home?
Yeah, I do, honestly, because now hearing that that's where they were originally going with it, initially I think of that as probably the way that a fan would tell it. Of, this is where we know Kenobi and Luke are at this point in the timeline, and that's sort of the immediate place that you would go to start. But I definitely think that it was better going this route and having more connective tissue to things like Rebels and Clone Wars and the prequels especially, makes it much more vital to the rest of the stories that they're telling with other series. I mean, now this has connections to The Mandalorian because of Bo, because Kenobi in this series alludes to Satine. He doesn't mention her by name, but he definitely brings her up to where someone who's a fan of Clone Wars would know that's exactly who he's talking about. So, yeah, and apparently it was Filoni that recommended adding Vader and revisiting Anakin and Kenobi rematching.
Yeah, I don't think this series works without Vader, in all honesty. The Vader interactions were the high point, undeniably. I think that in that rewrite process, though, is that there is a small sense of a lack of commitment. So what I mean by that is if you're going to go big, then I would be curious to know what vestiges specifically of the original scripts remained, because there were parts of this that still felt like small ball that led to the bigger game, as opposed to stuff that meshed organically. It felt a little bit, there was definitely some, strangely enough, instead of protagonist confusion, antagonist confusion, and there were some motivations that I think got a little mixed up in the rewrite process. And I think that worked to the detriment of the show overall. Not to the point where I didn't like it, but to the point where I was like, we could have done without this and gotten to this point quicker. And so I would be curious to know, like, how much of, like, was it a page one rewrite? Or was it a, hey, this is good, but let's extend it. Let's tack this stuff onto it. Because with that sort of meta knowledge of the series, it feels a little bit like that's the approach they took, where they were like, oh, no, we don't dislike what's here, but we're going to add stuff on. And it's like, I think it would have benefited mostly from just like that page one, burn it to the ground and rebuild it sort of approach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. From what I have read, from what I've, just from articles and everything like that, it does seem like it wasn't complete page one, but it was close. There's stuff that comes through. But I mean, originally the script had different villains, and there were just a lot of things that didn't quite. I don't think. Again, that just felt small ball. But I can actually see what you're saying, John, because I do think there is some of that when we talk about those antagonists, Vader and the Inquisitors and all that, and it's not quite as clean as it could have been. And I think, again, that's a writing process thing. I do think them going bigger is much, closer to what we want as fans in the first place. I think, the fact that for Kenobi, and I've got to give credit to Kennedy and Chow, who both said that the strongest connections between the series had nothing to do with something like The Mandalorian or any of its spin-off series. That we're connecting to the prequels. We're connecting to the Clone Wars. We're connecting to Rebels. That's our closest connection points. And so we want to make sure that we're utilizing that material, which, I think is one of the things in which this show benefits from those things and those connections. So I'm glad they decided to do that. I think you're absolutely right, John. If they had not done Maul in Rebels, I think that's the only other thing that you could have done that would have made sense besides Darth Vader. But they already did that. And so you can't touch that. I think, just to come back to your point, I think Vader is the thing that makes this work, because the storyline we're telling here is we're starting with Ben.
Yeah. This
is how Kenobi gets his groove back. And that's the why of this show. John, you and I did an Aggressive Negotiations where we talked about Kenobi and how broken he is from his past, the failures he thinks that rest solely on his shoulders, and dealing with the fallout of everything he's lost. And, I think starting with that and then having the end point being, okay, basically, how can we end with this guy being the person who would become what we see in episode 4, and to tell that story. And for that being the why, and doing that for Kenobi, I think that's fantastic, because I think that story is really well told in this show.
Right. And I mean, that's the thing that really should have been focused on more than, I feel like if they had gone the route of it being mostly him protecting Luke already, I think that's kind of skipping ahead of where you want to be in this show. And then also, like they said, it's then too similar to the Lone Wolf and Cub they were already doing with Mandalorian, and they needed to do something a lot more grandiose.
Yeah. I mean, just to double back to the Maul thing, I think that would have been disastrous for the general audience. It's hard enough explaining to people why Maul is there in Solo if they haven't watched Clone Wars. I actually had that conversation during Solo where somebody said, so wait a minute, this is before Phantom Menace? And I was like, no. And that's the thing, is we have to keep in mind that those sorts of things are not easily accessible for the general audience, and they're trying to make this show for everybody. And the thing is, I got a fair number of notes from people at work and in other parts of my life where there were aspects of this that they were trying to plug into where it was a little bit more of a challenge for them. And I think that in that rewrite process, I don't know if they paid close enough an eye to bringing everybody up to speed. For us, really easy to jump in and know exactly what they're talking about. Think of how it is for a lot of people who've never heard of an Inquisitor who tune into this show. It's like, wait, what?
Right.
You know, and that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means it's, you know, honestly, did they take that into account for everybody? And did they take it into account for everybody about, I mean, you know, for us, we see the Grand Inquisitor get stabbed and we're like, what? And for most people, the note I got back for that was, oh, he just seems kind of dumb. I actually got that note from somebody where they were like, how did he not see that one coming? And I was like, okay, you know, it's just the way things work sometimes and all of that. But, you know, and I know I've gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I think that there is an aspect possibly that they have, you know, that they overcomplicated it a little bit. So.
Well, I want to speak to that because I think you are on to something in the sense that you can easily fix that by creating a crawl at the beginning of the first episode. You know, we had the lead in where you kind of did the visual montage of the Kenobi Anakin story. But I think you can just as easily do that with a crawl, because Star Wars already does this, right? And you can explain just like you would in one of the, you know, episodes 1 through 9, what's going on, you know? Hey, here's the lay of the land. You know, Vader, you know, searches the galaxy with his group of Inquisitors trained in the dark side of the Force, looking for, you know, surviving Jedi. I mean, it's so easy to make this happen without any time being. I mean, 30-second crawl, you fixed every problem that you just mentioned, John. That brings people up to speed and helps them feel like, okay, I got it. I don't have to have seen everything, but I know exactly where I am now in this story. And so, yeah.
You know, and it's, I know it seems like a real nitpick, but it all springs from, you know, I'm the guy in the office that everybody comes to because I'm the Star Wars guy, right? And it's like after every single episode, people would come to my office and they would say, okay, so, and I was like, okay, well, all right, that's a half hour that I'm going to lose, but sure. Let me try to, you know, alleviate and or show you that I'm a reasonable man and it's okay. You don't have to love everything. It's all right, you know? So,
well, So for you guys, you know, getting back to Ben and John, don't feel bad. I think that was a fantastic point to make. And I would say, honestly, I think Christy and I have probably said it too when we've talked about some of the Marvel shows where you just like, we talked about it specifically with Moon Knight. So anyway, that's a whole other podcast that we did. You can check that episode out. So how do you guys, we do start off this show with Ben Kenobi completely broken and like a changed man, like absolutely the exact opposite of everything he used to be. And how did you feel with that? Did that work for you? Did you feel like they had earned that moment and that we were in then a good starting place for the arc we want to take this character on?
Yeah, I did. I think that a big part of it especially goes to Ewan McGregor's portrayal. I think definitely it was the smartest choice in the world having him back, of course. And he had said that he was interested in it before they were even working on this. And then I really would be interested too in watching Revenge of the Sith and then immediately starting this to see how it feels so close together. But yeah, I mean, I think that he does such a great job of showing that Ben has been through unimaginable things all at once and is now just trying to figure out his place in the world, where, you know, he had a mission before. He was one of all of these Jedi and knew exactly what he was responsible for. And now it's like he is completely lost. He has no one similar to him anymore to turn to. He feels that he's failed his star pupil, and he is now tasked with protecting Luke, and now especially is seeming to not be able to use the Force. So yeah, I think he does the best job showing that he's broken. And then he's got to figure out where to go from here.
Yeah. Broken Obi-Wan is what I showed up for. Like,
Yeah.
I got to see this guy put his life back together. It's not interesting if he doesn't. Honestly, it goes back, and I think I've used this example before, but, talk about other stuff or whatever. But old dear friend of mine, Joey, one of the big fights we had, stupid as it is, was about Star Trek VI. Because in that movie, in Star Trek VI, it starts off, Kirk hates Klingons. Like, it's pathological. Mm-hmm. He despises them. And he's willing to let them all die because he hates them so much. But then by the end of the movie, spoilers, even though it's been out for 30 years, he says, hey, no, the future can be scary. Let's everybody, let's be cool. Let's work it out. Right. And Joey hated that the hero was in this dark place in the beginning. And I remember back then saying, where's he going to go if he doesn't start there? You have to start with your hero. He has to go on a journey to become the hero. And Obi-Wan never really got a hero's journey per se. So in this one, he gets his hero's journey. And this is his episode 3. But his episode 3 ends better than Anakin's episode 3. So, yeah, that's what I showed up for.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're both absolutely right. And Christy, obviously, you can't do this show without Ewan McGregor. And he's the main reason we're doing this, because everybody wants to see him. And he's phenomenal in the series. But I think the weakness that he portrays, the brokenness, he just feels completely shattered. Mm-hmm. There's nothing left. There is not even really a spark of hope. John, you and I talked about that in that episode we did about unaggressive negotiations. And all he's holding on to is the very last mission he has. And he's being driven by fear and remorse and guilt and all of the things that Jedi are supposed to be able to find a way to let go of so that they can focus on the here and now. But Obi-Wan lives in the past. And, there's that wonderful moment where Tala says to him, some things you can't forget, but you can fight to make them better. And Obi-Wan, at that point, at the beginning of the show, he's lost that, and so I love it for exactly all the reasons that you guys said. So, and I think too, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like they found basically the only reason that you could call Obi-Wan to arms. The only reason that he would leave Tatooine would be Leia. Do you guys agree with that? Do you feel like they found the right key to unlock that story of him leaving that mission? Or do you feel like maybe there was something else? Or how did it work for y'all?
No, I think it's the only thing you could have used just from a practical standpoint, because if you have Luke get kidnapped and taken off of Tatooine and somebody knows who he is, et cetera, that creates a whole bunch of story problems. But Leia's a member of the royal family. That makes perfect sense. And it actually makes your villain seem a little bit more intelligent, because she's not going after her because of a perceived connection to Anakin, but because this family knows Kenobi. If we do something to them, then most likely Kenobi shows up. That makes sense. And so I think from a practical storytelling standpoint, it's the only choice they really had. unless they were going to have something like Yoda call him up on the spirit phone and be like, come to Dagobah, you must. And then like he goes off there or something.
The spirit phone. The spirits in the sky.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yoda shows up in the clouds like Mufasa.
I love it.
Remember.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That was good. But yeah, I agree. I think that it was also something, the only thing that would have motivated him, because it was also a child, and then because it was that child. I think that at this point in his story, otherwise he wouldn't have been propelled enough to leave and do something about it otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I did love about the show, is that I felt like it was ingenious in the way it decided to tell the story, and that was, okay, if we want to do this, if we're gonna drag Kenobi off of Tatooine, there is really only one way to do that. And I think they absolutely found the right story element. And I think the beauty of that is where we not only have we left Kenobi in a place where he's shattered, but like Christy, you mentioned earlier, he's not connecting with the Force, mostly out of fear, I think, because he's so worried about something bad happening to Luke that he's not even really willing to do the training he's been given by Yoda, to really put his heart and soul into that. He's not ready for it either, which, we'll get to in a little bit. But I think by putting him back in action, it's the same, like, John, you rightly called it out. This is Obi-Wan's hero's journey. And it's that same thing that Luke needed, right? He needed to be thrown into the fire and refined. And for Obi-Wan to find the Force again, I think I love the way the action of episode 3 gave him that point where, I think it's episode 4. Yeah, it's episode 4. Where they go to rescue Leia. The Inquisitors. But the action of that episode in the Inquisitors' fortress, Obi-Wan has to start doing instead of thinking. And all he's done for 10 years is spent stewing and thinking and stewing and thinking, and it has left him powerless. And instead, just like Luke being thrown into the needing to practice against a remote, you don't think, stretch out with your feelings. It was a really perfect way to show that do or do not, there is no try. And honestly, Obi-Wan hasn't even really been trying. And that's for a lot of reasons, obviously, but I appreciated that to connect him back to who he was to put him back on the mission that he's kind of neglected, which is that being a Jedi really never stops. Even if you don't get to be overt, that internal needs to change for him. And I really appreciated that, like, he just had to do. And as he did, that connection with the living Force comes back. And I thought that was fantastic to actually... And it wasn't like they were telling us. We're just watching it happen. And
right.
If there's anything I love, it's like show, don't tell.
Yep.
And we just showed. We showed a broken Kenobi who's disconnected from the Force, and what brings him back is just having to do it. And I thought it was great.
Yes, I agree with you in principle that it was great. I don't necessarily agree in execution. Because, since we're talking specifically about, that split between the third episode and the fourth episode is where I think some of the structural problems started, the weight of the show started pulling it down. Like it got to be a little bit too much for the foundation. And it's really the point where I know exactly what you're saying. And I think it's just absolutely unfortunate that got nested within what I think and I don't think I'm alone in this. I think this is a consensus in the weakest episode of the entire series, where it was very quick. It was very, there were different problems with the way things happened that detracted even more from it. And so just that specific point winds up becoming a point of frustration for me because of the fact that you take this great thing that you're talking about and you put it in the middle of something that just as a whole piece, 1/6 of the series didn't work well. And I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you as well, John, on how that episode felt and kind of then how things were affected in the episodes after. I do think that as an idea, it's a great thing. I just wish that had been done a little better. I guess I kind of defend it a little because I think of the other times that Obi-Wan is reintegrating the Force into his life, like the scene where Leia is jumping from rooftop to rooftop and falls, and he has to use the Force without thinking to rescue her. That kind of forgives for me some of the way that episode 4 went with him using the Force.
Yeah. I mean, John, we've talked quite extensively behind the scenes, as we always do, but about some of the issues that we have with the show. We'll talk about them a little bit later, specifically, with the way that the editing works in the show. And I totally see what you're saying. I just think story-wise, what they're doing there is smart. Like, that's what you want to see happen. Is the execution perfect? It's not. But I think just thinking specifically about the storyline, I really loved that. And, I love that this show is basically Obi-Wan going from Ben to Obi-Wan again. Like, he has become Ben, which is this defeated, purposeless, almost just surviving type of person. And by the end of the series, he's found his strength, his purpose, his connection, his hope again. And part of that I really loved. And again, this was, I think, I wish it was stronger. I think the moment should have been played out longer. But when Obi-Wan is under the rocks, and what is it that gives him hope? It's remembering Luke and Leia and what they represent and all of that. And to me, I love that because it gives him to overcome the despair and the darkness that he's basically been in for 10 years. And it's not executed perfectly, but it's the right idea. Story-wise, it's beautiful. And so I love that. And part of that, too, is by him not forgetting, but letting go and fighting to make things better. And I really appreciate that moment. And I just appreciate then what it does for the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is the reason we're all here in this show in the first place.
Yes. And that's the thing, right, is it could easily devolve, but like you calling that scene specifically up, I think that this show asks too much of longtime fans, of casual fans too, because this is another thing, these sorts of scenes come up in the conversations with the people who aren't the hardcores and everything like that, where I do have to really harp on the execution of these things. It's not fair to an audience member to say, hey, you know what we're going for, so let's forgive some of this over here. That's inevitable. That happens with anything you watch. I know this. I accept it. It's cool. It's fine. But after a certain point, it becomes something of a burden to know that it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I know what you were going for, but I have to take a look at how it was done. And I know I'm not trying to drag us down a rabbit hole or anything like that. I know we're talking about editing later and all of those sorts of things, but it's not even an editing thing. It gets back to that page one rewrite. where that scene could have been an amazing sort of, and you know what? I'll take another property where it doesn't really work for everybody sort of thing. There's some stumbling blocks. The Dark Knight Rises. Despite any flaws that movie has, when Bruce Wayne finally climbs out of that prison, that is put together, like, even detractors of that movie are like, yeah, that's an incredible moment. Everybody's up and ready to cheer. And I just don't get that energy from there. And it's like, so Matt, while I agree with you, yes, this is in principle what the show is showing. It becomes frustrating because it just doesn't connect emotionally the way that it needs to in that moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to argue really hard with you because
I know.
I think you're right. And I already said it. You know, it's not like I already admitted that I don't think the execution is what it needs to be for that scene. But just thinking thematically for the character Kenobi, it is what needs to be there. It just needs to be done better. And I think part of that, we can get into more details later for editing, but that scene just needs to be longer. It needs to be a kind of a more drawn out experience for Obi-Wan because it's like 20 seconds, but it just needs to be something almost like Vision-like for him. And it's just not.
Yeah, so. I stumbled on it while talking with somebody else. How
dare you talk to other people, John?
I apologize. Can I throw an idea out to you that if I had been privileged to sit in that writer's room, I'd have been like, well, what if we do this instead? You want to know how I think you could have made that scene incredible? Like that emotional, mind-blowing moment? Have that be the moment where he first hears Qui-Gon say something like, what are you fighting for? Why are you here? Good. Sort of thing. Yeah. And all of a sudden the connection comes, and then he has the flashes of the kids, and it's his old master reaching out to him in his moment of need, like Luke dying on Hoth when Obi-Wan shows up and is like, listen, I know you're about to punch out, but hang in there, bro. You can do this. Have Qui-Gon show up at that scene, even just as a voice. Yeah. And Obi-Wan's like, oh my God, yes, that's exactly what I'm here for. You know, like, and it's just, I know I'm harping on it, and I'm sorry. Yeah. I don't mean to.
No, it's fine.
But
don't be sorry.
I don't think you need to be sorry at all.
No, I know, but I mean, it's like, I'm sure that there are plenty of people that are rolling their eyes where it's like, oh, well, you didn't write the show. And it's like, I know I didn't, but it's like,
sure,
it's just that thing, you know?
Right. Well, and I just wanted, not that I need to defend you. You've been on the show plenty of times and people know where you're coming from. But I think what you're saying is look, I get where we're going for here, and I'm not being destructively critical. I'm being constructively critical and saying, this is how I see it. I see what you're going for, and this is where I feel like, okay, we've got that. Let's make it better. I think that's one of the things that we strive for just here in the 602 Club all the time is we're not here to just trash things and, oh, that was stupid. You didn't say any of that. What you said is, no, that was all good. I just see how, we could have one-upped it, and and this is really difficult for me. Everybody knows how much I love Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's literally my favorite character in Star Wars. And, the portrayal of him by Ewan McGregor is my favorite. That's my favorite Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I wanted this show to be everything I could ever want possible in a show. Like literally, that's what I wanted. It's not. I'm not going to lie to the audience of the 602 Club and pretend like it is. So I appreciate you, John, for bringing up those issues because I have many of those same issues myself. So I mean, yeah.
And so do I.
Okay. One thing that so our friend Yancey, John, brought this to my mind because we were talking back and forth about the fight that Kenobi and Vader have. And the way it ends. And I wanted, before I even get to kind of where he landed, which I think really helped me kind of like, oh, I think you're absolutely right there. That makes complete sense. How did it work for you guys to have that fight go the way that it does, where Obi-Wan, I mean, he puts it to Anakin. He comes back and he kicks his butt. He kicks his Darth Vader butt all over that planet, and there is no mistake who is the master by the end of it. How do you feel about that?
I thought that it was good that they started off not going that way. That initially it comes across like possibly Obi-Wan could be beaten because he's just so mentally beaten already. And he does have to have that moment of realization, like you were talking about, Matt, to rise above it and to actually fight back harder. But I like that they have such a back and forth for a minute, and that you're not quite sure this time how it's going to turn out initially. And then he turns it around. And I think obviously this is what we were all waiting for with this show, not only to see Obi-Wan back, but to see the two of them rematch again. You know, it's been since Mustafar that they've been together in person, and that Anakin has had this opportunity to get him back, basically. And so I really love that the lines that they have between each other, and then especially that moment where he sees part of Anakin's face and really learns that the old Anakin is no longer in there. And like you said, Matt, is now just calling him Darth. It's like a twofold punch in the face, because he's saying, my friend isn't in there anymore. You've killed him. And I'm not even going to use your full new name because I don't have any respect for you anyway. So I thought it was good. I thought it could have been a little bit better, but still good.
I have a few more criticisms of it. I won't go into too much detail because I feel like I feel like I'm coming across too negative, I guess. I don't know. But
no, it's okay.
The thing is, right? Like this is the thing that we all, disclaim, where it's like, listen, we didn't write the show. So it's like, obviously, at a certain point, it just becomes wish list stuff. And so on my wish list would have been the best way for that fight to end would have been for Vader to think he won. Because one of the most beautiful things, and I'll call back to the other Star franchise really quick. One of the most beautiful things about the end of Star Trek II for me, spoilers for a 40-year-old film, is that Khan loses, but he thinks he wins. Khan dies thinking he won. And I think it's just a much more dramatically interesting resolution to this whole thing if Vader is able to walk away thinking, I got him. And then Obi-Wan gets out from underneath the rocks, and Obi-Wan goes off, and I could even see a scene where, it's picked up on the sensor scope that a ship is leaving the planet, when Vader's back on the Star Destroyer, and the Grand Inquisitor sees it, and Vader, has an exchange. It's like, what is it? It's like, oh, nothing. We heard reports of another rebel base on this planet over here. We should go. Like the Inquisitor's like, I got to let this sleeping dogs lie from here on out. Right. Because he knows that Vader's going to keep dragging them on this mission. And so like, it's even the Grand Inquisitor, like, gives him something more to do to sort of like keep it quiet. But all of that little stuff aside, I just do wish the real element that I wish had been in there. And I've talked about this before many, many times. I was thrilled that they faced each other. But what I wanted was Obi-Wan to truly try to convert him one last time. And they have some good dialogue for that. I think that one of the most fantastic lines of dialogue in the entire thing is, you didn't kill Anakin, I did. And like Vader owning it in that moment and being like, I want this. Screw you. And it's like, that's really awesome. But I would have preferred Obi-Wan trying to Luke it up a little bit and be like, I'm not going to fight you. Right. And have him, disappearing and jumping around, and then, bit of a stalemate, whatever have you, just to have a little bit more of that echo to give even more weight to Obi-Wan just completely giving up on him. I also dislike two things in specific. And I know I'm rambling, but there are two things in specific. One, that on Mustafar, Obi-Wan left Anakin because he was like, I cut off all of his limbs and I just watched him burn and his screams are dying off. I'm going to leave. I believe he's dead. With this, he beats Vader and walks off. And all I can think in my head is, how can he not feel responsible for everything Vader does for 8 to 9 years after that? Because he could have walked over and just ended it right there. And if Anakin's gone, hey, no loss, right? There's no reason to leave him alive. So I think it sort of put them in a corner that they didn't quite get out of.
But then too, I don't know. And sorry, Matt, I just like, I also went back and forth with myself on this, on whether Obi-Wan would have been capable of doing that anyway, whether that is the Jedi in him that's like, it's merciful to not end it. But then, you know, I mean, he sliced Maul in half, so
After
he's
a certain
willing to
point.
sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and so so this is where our conversation that I had with Yancey really helped. And that, you know, we had the flashback where Kenobi says a Jedi's goal is to defend life, not take it. And in the flashback, Anakin says, mercy doesn't defeat an enemy master. And I do believe that, as Yancey said, in Lucasian fashion, it does, in fact, defeat an enemy. Because Kenobi giving Anakin mercy at this moment when he... And that's not just mercy, it's grace. Anakin does not deserve to live. And yet, I believe this plants the seed that will bear fruit in Return of the Jedi. I believe that... And I don't care if you disagree, because I think you're absolutely wrong here. I think this is the seed that, like, Anakin is never going to be able to get over. Why? Because Vader here, there is still something that is driving him to defeat Kenobi, because he has a connection. He has to one-up him, and he can't, and he will never be able to. And that is the thing that I think this is the seed. I think this is the seed. And it won't bear fruition till the very end, but what the choice that Kenobi makes here is the one that also leads not only to Anakin's redemption, but it leads to the fact that Luke doesn't have to kill his father, that he can redeem him in the end, and that they can put an end to this. And yeah, it takes longer, but I think I like the way it works. I think it works. And not only do I think it works, but I also think that it shows that in the end, mercy has impacts and consequences that, you don't expect.
But the thing is, I think that's working overtime to forgive the corner that they're in.
I don't think so.
No, because of the fact you're talking in a practical sense about literally leaving. I'm not Anakin anymore. I'm Darth Vader. I'm a murderous psychopath with galactic power and ambition, and I'm going to kill tons and tons of people. Yeah, well, says you. That in and of itself is a bit of a problem. And I would say that possibly what you're doing is you're taking a little bit of Luke's achievement, and because maybe being a Kenobi fan, you're like, oh, wait, I want to give some of that to Kenobi. It doesn't work particularly well. It is, in fact, just a corner they're in. And if you want to work at it from that aspect, right, and say you want Kenobi to show him mercy, there are other ways that mercy can be shown. There are other ways that he can try to convert him and those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it's just another person, because this happens with Reva in the 5th episode, where they have somebody dead to rights and they just go, and they walk off. And it's like, just from a certain practical structural standpoint, again, I get what you're saying, but I don't think that it works particularly well.
And then I represent the third perspective.
Please.
Completely different from both of your opinions on it, which I think is interesting. But I feel like it was intentional because, honestly, the way that Darth Vader is bent over here, it reminds me of the scene where Palpatine tries to get Anakin to kill Dooku, and he's successful. And in this situation, as well as when, he's burning alive on Mustafar, Kenobi says, you've done enough to yourself, more than I could do. And I'm not going to be the person that does the final blow. And so I think that's why both times he leaves and lets Anakin punish himself, basically.
Again, I think both of these are interesting reads. I do, and it's like, and if that works, cool. I'm telling you why it doesn't work for me.
Sure.
And I want to ask the two of you, though, going off of that, for new fans or people who didn't watch Clone Wars or Rebels, seeing Vader's helmet split like that must have been really cool. I felt it was a little bit too familiar, because I've seen that already. Granted, it was on the other side of his helmet that time, I think, which is fine. But do you think that being a longtime fan works against you in that moment? Because my first thought when I saw that wasn't, oh, that looks cool. It was, oh, I saw that in Rebels. Yeah, that looks neat live.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my take.
Yeah, I get that take. And I initially wasn't overwhelmingly excited by it either. But I guess I justified it because, when you're fighting someone who is completely covered and you can't actually look them in the eye,
sure,
it's different. And so I felt like that was the reason that Kenobi especially wanted to do that specifically without hurting him, but actually, get to look him directly in the eye and say, are you still in there? That's why I thought it was cool.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely looks cool. Definitely looked cool. And I, like everybody else, loved when the light switched from blue to red. I thought that was really, nicely done. Sure.
See, I hear what you're saying, and I saw somebody that I follow on Twitter, loudly complaining about it in like all caps kind of thing. And I don't see it that way. I think that it makes sense for the two people other than Padme, who, she's gone now, but for Kenobi and Ahsoka to have experienced this with Anakin, it makes sense. And this, I think, it's not quite the same as what happens with Ahsoka, because this isn't about the relationship in the sense that Ahsoka doesn't feel responsible for Anakin turning out the way he did. Mm-hmm. Obi-Wan does. And this is the thing I think that gives him the closure, basically, that he needs to be able to let go of what he perceived as being all of the mistakes he made. I think he still holds those mistakes in his mind, and that's one of the reasons that a lot of the things that he talks about with Luke now make even more sense. Because he does believe Vader is completely gone. He does believe that Vader is a lost cause. Why? Because Anakin said so, literally to his face.
But see, that's the thing, is I'm not disagreeing with you about that.
No,
I'm just saying that the way that it's done is...
I know.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, but to me, like, it seems like a nice rhyme with what we've already done. And plenty of things in Star Wars repeat on purpose, and to me, this repetition did not bother me, mainly because, too, it is a part of this story that we're telling for Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it does help him in his arc then for where he's going to move forward. And it's very important because I think it's the thing that helps him finally let go of the past, which allows him to, one of the things, to finally see, let's talk about it, Qui-Gon at the end. Like, we get the reward of what we've all kind of been waiting for this whole series, where he keeps trying to talk to Qui-Gon, not getting any feedback. And finally, at the end, did that work for you guys? Were you happy to see, Liam Neeson back? I know, John, you probably hated it. I know you don't even like Qui-Gon, so,
Well, I'm the show's curmudgeon this week, so
this is true. This is true. You have been so far. So
no, no. I mean, I'm thrilled to see Qui-Gon. I know that there is one complaint that filtered over to me from another longtime fan who asked the question, said, "Wait a minute, doesn't that the quote unquote lost season of Clone Wars establish that Qui-Gon can't appear physically? He can only manifest his voice, et cetera, et cetera." And I sidestepped that one as I'm like, it depends on the person's connection to, and it's been 10 years and, he keeps word, blah, blah, blah. You can explain your way out of that corner. I think less messily than the fight with Vader. And so I was thrilled to see Qui-Gon back. It was great. And I love the fact that he has sort of like a Marley's ghost quality about him where he says, "Oh, I've been sitting next to you this whole time. You just couldn't see me." And the thing is that I think is a very Lucas type of line to drop the hint that like it wasn't Qui-Gon's inability to manifest physically. It's the other person's ability to see. So like it gets that whole idea of that Carlos Castaneda stuff that Lucas likes to have in there about it's your ability to see the spirit world that we're talking about, not the spirit world's ability to communicate to you, that it's up to you to figure out how to make that connection.
Right.
Regardless of whether Carlos Castaneda was a charlatan or not, he still had some interesting books. But anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're 100% right with that, John, because it was very clear that Obi-Wan had to go through a change before he was ready to be able to really devote his life back to being a Jedi full time. And so it wasn't until he had completed the journey that he needed to, that he would be able to see him.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. And it was awesome to see Liam Neeson.
Yes. You know what? There's so much baggage with Liam Neeson attached with Star Wars that it's like, hey, all right, everybody's happy again. Everybody's getting together. Cool. I was happy to see it for that reason.
Well, I mean, I love, he came out and said, one of the reasons he did it is to pay homage to, George Lucas and how much he appreciates George. So I was like, yeah, that's great. I love everything you guys said. I think absolutely it really does come down to that idea of what you can see. It also helps explain that even Yoda in that arc wasn't quite ready, right? He's still on his journey, So I thought that's actually beautiful because it informs that storyline in a really interesting and positive way, And so something if you're going to add things, John, you've had issues with the way this has impacted other things in the saga. This one, I think, is a really positive introduction. And I mean, how could you be upset with seeing Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn back? And
that beautiful hair.
Yeah.
Hey.
What it does, though, is that at the beginning, the very first episode, he tells that young Jedi the time of the Jedi's over. Basically, bury it and walk away. And here, he is a Jedi again. He is wearing the Jedi robes. He's wearing the robes that you see on the Mythos statue or in that comic. He is a Jedi again. He has reclaimed the mantle. In fact, one might say this is the return of the Jedi. And so I appreciate that introduction is the proof that Kenobi is back being who he is. He's no longer Ben. He will go by that name still. But internally, who he is again is Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I think it's even the reason why this show is not just called Kenobi. It's called Obi-Wan Kenobi. Because it's about him making that transition. And Qui-Gon being back is the final linchpin for him to make that transition. So where we started and where we ended, how it started and how it's going, they like to do on Twitter, it starts with Ben being in a meat processing plant, nowhere near being Jedi material anymore. And at the end, he clearly is. I mean, he's even wearing his lightsaber again, which is dangerous thing to do, even on Tatooine, right? So, okay. I don't know if we want to talk too much about all the Inquisitors.
I don't think we need to talk about all of them in depth.
No, we don't.
Right.
Quickly, though, just to get it out of the way, with the Grand Inquisitor, did you like the way they made it all make sense? Did it work for you? Was it okay? Did you feel like it was too much? What did you end up thinking of that? Because, of course, all of us that have watched the show were like, what do you do now?
I wouldn't have had him involved in it. I would have had him be a hologram and maybe be the one to go wake up Vader and be like, tap on the glass and be like, my lord, tap, tap, tap. Well, we got a thing going on here. Reva kidnapped Senator Organa's daughter. We kind of got to clean this mess up. I would have had him removed from the action probably. Just because as a longtime fan, I know he's not going to die. And, we all started speculating immediately. It's like, oh, is he going to get cloned? Is it some sort of like, oh, he's in hell, blah, 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 that sort of thing. But I think it was, even for people who haven't watched, again, Clone Wars and Rebels, they came to me and they were like, oh, he didn't seem that tough. And it's like, oh, so it diminished him. I don't like that it diminished the character so much. I know that they had him there so that they could have the conference of Grand Inquisitor on Reva. But even that was not necessary because it was so brief. It's like, you're Grand Inquisitor. Okay, yeah, just kidding. Like, it didn't really. I don't know. I would have had him involved differently in the show. That's just my take on it.
I was really confused when I first saw him because the look that they went with doesn't match up with the artist's version of the Grand Inquisitor being this like tall gangly thing. So I was going, wait, he's who? Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I'll accept that that's the same guy. But yeah, it was okay. But yeah, I agree with you, John. I don't think it was necessary to have him. And like I said, I wish that the look had been closer to what I expected to see if you're going to have that character come back.
Sure.
I guess I feel differently than you guys. There's plenty of ways you could have worked your way out of this. Again, I think it would kind of have been interesting if they had you had found out that they're all clones, basically, except for Reva, because they're part of the Emperor's like cloning thing. Like, I think that might have been interesting. But again, that really connects to things in the future more so than I think they wanted to, which that was one of the mandates, is that's not what they were really going for in this show. They're not trying to connect to everything that comes in the future. This is about the past. But what I actually really enjoyed is that by the end of the show, what we see happen with Vader and the Inquisitor playing Reva this whole time is a representation of just the Sith in general. How everybody is a pawn of somebody else, and nobody cares about you. Like, and I thought that actually worked. Like the revelation that, yeah, in the end, we don't care about you. And we've been using you actually this whole time for our own benefit. And that really speaks to, I think, the way that the Sith work. I think you're probably about to hit this, John, so I'll just go ahead and say it. It's another place where it could have been better executed. And but when they came to the end, and he steps out of the shadows and everything like that, I was like, okay, that makes much more sense, though, that this whole thing is about using her to basically draw out Kenobi because she has this, the thing about it is that the storyline is just it's messier than it needs to be. And I think, as we've talked about many times already, if you had done it's almost like if you've given the script for the whole series a polish, this is one of the storylines that you just want to make more important or just done differently.
You want to make Reva's arc even more interesting because we know which group of children she was a part of in the Grand Hallway. It's Obi-Wan and Yoda discover this group of children in the main hallway, the Grand Hallway, whatever you want to call it, in the temple in Episode 3. And they're like, oh, who could have done this, right? And it cuts to Anakin. Maybe, just maybe, what we could have had is we could have had Reva, who I think, even though it was maybe clumsily communicated, I guess she did get stabbed by Vader when she was a kid. I'm not entirely clear visually whether she was, because, but have her sort of like regain consciousness as Obi-Wan and Yoda are leaving. And she's like trying to reach out as a kid, like, help. And they can't hear her. Or she doesn't have the strength to do it. And she blacks back out. Like, that makes Reva even more interesting. And that explains why she's not on about Kenobi just because she knows that's the way to get to Vader. She's on about Kenobi because that guy left her for dead. And so then you get that whole layer thing of like Obi-Wan has a habit of leaving people for dead.
They did.
Yeah. Right. But
in a way that a child, Yeah.
And so it's like, it would have even made the Grand Inquisitor and Vader being there together, like, have even more of an interesting echo with everything. Yeah. And it's just, but I mean, like, Grand Inquisitor himself, I just think I think the other Inquisitors weren't utilized particularly well. They were there, but it was like, they were just there. I mean, like, I would have preferred to have a scene where somebody gives them orders where they're like, no, we can take care of this. It's like, no, you're going to go take care of this. You're out, so that we see them, we encounter them briefly, and then we see where they are in the pecking order is somebody specifically pointing at them and saying, get out. I didn't ask for you. And reinforce this whole thing that you're saying, Matt, about how everybody's a pawn.
Yeah. Well, and Fifth Brother was so cool. I wish that they had done more with him than just kind of made him like the guy that keeps getting knocked down,
Yep. I completely agree.
Yep. No, I can't disagree with any of that. And I think this is where, as we've just been talking about the series, we're pointing out all of these places where it's like, it's close, but it's not quite there. And for the story of Reva, third sister, I thought it was actually kind of an ingenious thing to have this character want to hunt Vader because of that. I thought that was, and, of course, showing us Order 66 and all of these younglings and everything, and actually what Anakin is doing there put even more to that than what we even saw in the film. I thought that was fantastic. I thought her performance, too, grew in the series. I felt like, to me, the first few episodes, it felt a little too modern for me, and the choices that she was making performance wise, but I felt like things got better and better with each episode with her as well. And to get then to the end of kind of her redemption was interesting. And I had said to some friends of mine, I thought that they might be going this direction with redemption for her, and then they did that. So I have to ask you guys, does that work for you? And she's one of 4 people or so now that knows that Luke is Luke. Does that work?
No. I'll just come right out of the gate. No, I didn't like that she figured out that where Luke was. It reminds me of the 1990s Batman movies, where every single movie, everybody knew you introduced was like, oh, Bruce Wayne is Batman. Oh, Bruce. And so, like, honestly, by the 4th movie, you're like, how does all of Gotham not know by this point? Right. And I don't like that specific element got introduced. I don't like how it resolved itself. Technically, I would have rather had the character left for dead and have me have the question of where does she go from here? Because the show was about Obi-Wan, and I like the introduction of this new character, and I would have rather had the question left out there, because then I would have come to it and said, where did she go after that? Did she survive? I'm more invested in her future after that, and then seeing an actual arc, right? If they want to use the character later. And the one other thing that really would have improved her as a character in the second episode specifically is a helicopter lightsaber. I was very disappointed that she's jumping from rooftop to rooftop when she has a perfectly functional helicopter lightsaber that she can use to fly across the city. That's my final say on it.
Well, John, they can't do that because no one liked it the first time.
Oh, I'm sorry. No one liked it the first time, Christy?
I'm just messing with you. I did.
Yes, exactly. It would have been so cool to see live action. Like, how many minds would have been blown in, like, where people would be like, oh, they could do that? I guarantee you the normal...
Would we say minds blown? No.
Yes, we would. I know for a fact that a lot of people would have loved it because it's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm in the same camp as John on this. It sucks that there are some things that just weren't executed as well as they should have been for her character, because she does have such an interesting backstory, because this is the first time that we've had one of the younglings' perspective on what happened with Order 66. And I thought they did not explain well, like you already alluded to, John, whether Anakin stabbed her with his lightsaber and she ended up surviving but played dead, or if she never got actually hit but she played dead to survive. It was very unclear. And then every time that they tried to show her justification for her actions and having her say in the dialogue that she was doing it because of, on behalf of all the younglings that were killed, it only ever shows her face as a child and not her connections to all of the others and the motivation that would have caused her to want to fight for them. I just felt like I wanted more there and they just weren't giving me enough. And honestly, too, I felt like her costume design was kind of out of place for, at the time, 10 years after we've lost Padme, there still would have been all of these different humanoid people or aliens that would have crazy hairstyles and robes and things like that. And yes, she's, part of the Empire now, but it was just a little bit too plain for me. I felt like they could have done something more interesting with her hair, or, like Seventh Sister had the cool helmet or something, other than just like the bodysuit and cape. So yeah, I wanted a lot more from Reva than we got is the problem. And I felt like initially in the first episode or two, her performance was a little dry.
I don't necessarily have a problem with her knowing who Luke is. And I get what you're saying, John, but this isn't Batman in the sense where everybody does know.
But how is the thing too.
What do you mean?
How did she know who Luke is? Obviously it's obvious how she could tell where he was, but why does she care? Was not explained that I remember.
I think Bale says something about, the children and stuff like that, and she gets a snippet of that. But to your point, Christy, it's just like the moment where it's like we're all questioning, wait, was she stabbed when she was a kid? Was she just hiding? Like, what were the mechanics of that? I think that they leave a little breadcrumb, but they never point in the right direction for it. So I can sort of sit there and say, okay, she's figuring if Obi-Wan cares about this girl and there's another kid on Tatooine, this must be connected to Vader. But it's a little bit of a leap. I would have rather had her go back and going after Kenobi to wrap that up, and he's gone to talk to Luke or the Lars, and she shows up and she says, oh, there's another child? Oh my gosh, are you kidding? And have like a scene like that, I think would have drawn it out better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess I don't really. I'm struggling to figure out what the problem is here, because it seemed pretty obvious to me, like how she figures it out and why she goes there, that she is going there to hurt Anakin.
But she doesn't know that he's Anakin's child.
Yeah, she does.
How though?
from the message.
She
from
pieces it
Bail
together.
Organa.
Yes, she pieces it together, but it's not specific. Like it is something where, again, much like some of the other structural things we've talked about, they're asking the audience to do some extra lifting. So yes, when I saw her see that message, I said, oh, okay, she's pieced together who Luke is. She's going to go after him on Tatooine, blah, blah. But I think that Christy raises a very fair point to say that the show, you love to throw the phrase out, Matt, show, don't tell. And it's like, if there is a part of the audience that's saying that's not entirely clear to me, then that speaks to, they didn't communicate it quite well enough. So, I think it's a fair criticism. I have a specific problem with more people knowing about Luke at all. That's where I have my issue, is I don't like more people knowing, because I want this to remain such a guarded secret that it is so uncommon to know or piece together, because Vader and Palpatine would have had their suspicions to begin with. And the more people that know, the more risk there is of that information getting out there and writing yourself into more of a corner.
Right. Mm-hmm. I get that too. I mean, again, I'm not here to completely defend the choices that they're making. I don't really necessarily have a huge issue with it. But part of that is that I really think the decision is actually more predicated on the fact that they're hoping to do something else with the character, and possibly they are opening basically the door for Kenobi Season 2. And to me, I think that's where the choice, I would much rather her have sacrificed herself to save Luke from something, even her own mistake, right? Mm-hmm. And die in that process, then because I think that makes it stronger. So that, because again, in some ways, she's forgiving Anakin and letting that go and saving a child and basically doing the very thing that she doesn't want to do. She almost causes herself to become what she hates. And yet then she ends up dying instead to keep herself from doing that. I think that works better, and then you don't have this problem. I really just though think this is actually one of the places where it's more predicated on the fact that they're leaving the door open for Kenobi Season 2 and her as a character, and that's actually where I'm more bothered by it story-wise, because I don't feel like it's the best choice for the story.
I completely agree with you. Leave everything on the table. Don't think like you're going to get a second season. Don't think like you're going to get another movie. Everything's on the table. You throw everything in. That's one of the reasons, and I know people complained about it, but that's one of the reasons that I loved Solo, is they didn't say, we're going to make 3 movies, so we'll leave some stuff out. They said, no, you know what? We get 1 movie. What are we going to do with this? Put everything in. Put everything in, and we'll worry about it later. Yeah. I think that's, to your point, Matt, I think that is exactly right. I think you put your finger on it right there, where they were thinking more in terms of what can we set up for next season, as opposed to giving us such an incredible experience that at the end we said, find a way to make season 2. Find a way to make season 2, or we're going to storm Disney Plus's gates and we're going to burn that to the ground. That's what I want. I agree with you.
And I think a lot of properties now make that mistake. And I think we've talked about that on this show before, is it's got to be able to stand alone.
And I'll just bring up, and I've brought this up many a times. That's the thing that made those newer Planet of the Apes films so good. They were only making 1 film at a time. If they got asked to make more, they went back and figured out how to do it. But they weren't leaving anything on the table. They were we just make the best film we can make at this moment. And if somebody calls us back to make another one, we'll figure that out then. But that's not what we're doing here.
Yeah. I will go out on a limb and say that the both of you talked about something where that is a series that's very strong and everybody loves, that keeps finding a way to come back, and that's Stranger Things. Where first season I was like, wow, that was incredible, that's done. And then they were like, Stranger Things 2, and I was like, wait, really? How are you going to do that? And then, oh, wow, that's how you did that. That's so cool. And season 3 wasn't great, but Murray got a lot of screen time, so that's good. But then with season 4, now they're back again, and I'm like, oh, this is a totally different new thing that you did, and I wouldn't have seen this breadcrumb in season 3 at all. It has nothing to do with that. So
no, 100%, man. I'm speechless because I don't know how to talk about how great Leia was in this show. I thought that the performance was fantastic. She's so cute. And she kind of feels like that you would expect young Leia to feel like, which is slightly bossy, kind of annoying sometimes because, what 10-year-old isn't? Having worked with a lot of 10-year-olds, they can definitely be like that. But I loved her in the show, and they had created the thread that they needed for Kenobi to have that moment that we talked about, because her performance and her connection with him was so good. And I can't say enough good things about her. I think she was just a bright spot in the show.
Yeah, I absolutely loved her. I think that you definitely had a challenge set up bringing Leia into this, because you have to make sure it still represents who we know to be Leia later on. And then also that connective tissue again to A New Hope of Leia and Obi-Wan's interactions in the future. And I think that Vivian Lyra Blair does such a great job at portraying Leia's intelligence and confidence for being so young, and that you're going, oh yeah, that's absolutely what Leia would do, or how she's standing there at the end in her royal garb with a holster on. She's ready to go always. And no one can tell her no. I thought she did such a great job of playing this character, but then also the vulnerability, and playing off of Ewan so well. Yeah, she was great. The only thing that I would have changed a little bit is I was kind of concerned at this point, since they've gotten so close, about then when we see her reaching out to Obi-Wan in A New Hope, that it's almost like she doesn't really know him. And now I'm going, well, they've spent all this time together now.
Now this is the one that I've defended to people who have critiqued that specifically. First and foremost, I'll say, I have daughters. I've been through 10 twice. I'm coming up on 10 again soon enough. Leia is a little bit young. They cast her a little bit young. That's okay. Because I thought she was great overall, but she's not quite 10. Like it's hard to explain. There's like an intangible.
She looks too young for being 10, is what you're saying.
She carries herself a little too young. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, I mean, 8 seems really close to 10, but trust me, it's a little bit, but it's a minor quibble. And it's like me bringing my real world thing. It's like, not every 10-year-old is the same. So it's like, okay, this 10-year-old works though. Okay. So that's cool. In terms of her message to Obi-Wan in the original Star Wars, I had a neighbor actually harping on that, saying, "Oh, she's saying General Kenobi like she doesn't." I'm like, no, it's calling the old war hero back. General Kenobi, you served my father in the Clone Wars, right? She's specifically addressing the general. She's letting him know the time to come back for wartime. This isn't a personal request. We need General Kenobi this time. And then in terms of her familiarity, later on when Luke breaks her out, he says, "I'm here with Ben Kenobi." And she says, "Ben Kenobi, where is he?" And so she's a lot less formal in that scene. She doesn't say General Kenobi or Obi-Wan. She says Ben Kenobi. So she does later on show that she has a bit more familiarity with him. So that would be my answer. Is I like, that's the one thing, that's the one quibble that I wind up defending, is I'm like, no, it kind of works for me. So.
Well, and I also love, too, that, like, her message sounds the way that it does because it doesn't reveal to anyone that they know each other or have history for any reason.
Yeah, I heard that today from someone, and I was like, okay.
and part of that would be because what does Obi-Wan tell her? He says, nobody can know that we know each other. It could be detrimental to you and to I.
Yeah.
And two, because of the ramifications then, right, for Luke. There's a lot going on there. And so, but then, John, we just watched Star Wars, my wife and I, and that line jumped out to me in the detention center because it's like, she's so excited that Ben Kenobi's here. Ben Kenobi is her friend. She loves Ben, she can't wait to see him. So, if you want to quibble with anything, the only frustrating thing is that she's not more broken up about his death, because she would be. Of course, she also lost her whole planet, so it's like she's got a lot of emotion she never gets to deal with. So.
Mom and Dad just blew up.
Exactly.
Home doesn't exist anymore.
Exactly.
She's compartmentalizing. She's figuring it out.
We had some new friends show up in the show with Haja and Tala and Roken. What did you guys think of some of the new characters we introduced to the series here? Some new friends for Kenobi.
I like the characters, but I think that some of their moments were a little bit too. I have trouble putting it into words, but like Tala. She wasn't done any favors by the structure of the show. I thought it was a fine performance. I thought it was an interesting character. And really, I think she gets short shrift from the 4th episode because there are so many structural things that aren't the character's fault, but I associate them with the character, which isn't fair to her. But hey, it is what it is. I thought it was nice that they gave her a heroic death, but I didn't quite get the emotional impact that I would have liked, basically. I think that, I loved Roken. I want to see him show up in the Andor show. Like, that's how much I enjoyed him. I want him there. And, Haja, cute scene. I would have possibly preferred him just being in that one moment and then move on instead of bringing him back again. But he didn't take anything away from the show. And I thought he was played well enough. So of the three of them, Roken was the big hit for me. I really liked him. And I just think Tala, she needed more, the actual moments built around her needed a little bit more structure. But yeah, that's where I'm with them.
So I may feel differently about this than both of you, but the big point of contention between my husband and I about this show was whether or not Kumail Nanjiani should have been in it. And I love him as an actor, but I know him too much for comedy. And so it just felt wrong to me. I thought the character was fine. And I get why they chose him for that role. But it's like every time I was waiting for him to throw out the punchline and then it never came. And I was like, oh, he's being serious now. Okay. So yeah, I'm a little bit worried with casting like this that they're going to continue to look for big names and say, oh, we need to make them a part of this show when maybe they're not the best fit. So that's how I felt about him as Haja. But otherwise, I thought that Tala was good. I thought it was funny having another person from Game of Thrones, speaking of Pedro Pascal. And she's not as recognizable, I think, as like Kumail is, at least for me. But I agree with John. I think that you said it best, that there were some things surrounding her with the writing, not with her character or her performance, but just that didn't do her justice. And I thought that her introduction was great. I mean, you absolutely don't expect that she's going to defect from the Empire and help them. Or, show them the path and everything, which then apparently, ties in Quinlan Vos a little bit. So yeah, I like her, and I thought Roken was okay, but I'm a little bit wondering if they could have written him a little better to seem like he's ready to be the leader that Obi-Wan is asking him to be.
Well, I think Roken also has the disadvantage of being in, and here's where, okay, prepare the slings and arrows from some, of being a part of the worst chase scene since The Last Jedi. Because that entire chase scene was, oh no, we're in mild peril. And it hurt me to look at this chase scene, and I felt like Milhouse watching the Poochie episode of Itchy and Scratchy going, when are they going to get to the cracker factory? I just wish that whole thing had gone better, because I think, Christy, you would have gotten that moment from him if they had shored that up and restructured it a bit before Obi-Wan flew away in a ship that seemed too big for holding that many people in there.
Yeah.
So I'll comment on the other things, and then I'm going to destroy John's argument.
Okay.
And
good to know.
It's fine. It happens all the time on our shows, so you should
be
used to that now.
Interesting. Never witnessed it.
This is how we are in real life. Like,
go
when
on.
we get together, it's fun. Christy, I'm right there with you, though. I was actually worried that the casting for Haja would hurt the show, and I actually thought he felt great in the episodes, mainly because he walked the line of humor and just the character well. So I really liked him. I thought O'Shea Jackson as Roken was fantastic. I'm with John. If he doesn't show up in the Andor show, I think it's a travesty, because why not carry that character's story onward with that? You know, no reason not to. And Tala is my favorite of them personally, and I was emotionally invested with her and her character, and I thought she was wonderfully portrayed, and I felt when she died. So I didn't have as much. I don't have as much of the issues that John did with that, and I don't hold it. Yeah,
you don't hold it against me.
Yeah, I just had I just really loved her as a character, and I'm actually sad on some ways that she's gone, just because I really liked the character. You know, the whole idea, of course, of a, you know, ex-Imperial who realized what the Empire was and then turned against it and all that stuff. I thought that was interesting, and I actually just, her chemistry with Ewan was great, and it's kind of just sad we'll never get to see more of that, you know. But yeah, she gets the heroic death, and that's great. They're not new friends, but having Bonnie and Joel back as Beru and Owen was phenomenal. Just really glad that they were there, even though they didn't have a ton to do. Like, I just loved having them back. Just for the chase scene, to me, that whole chase is, for Vader, it's personal. And he is clouded by this. And in fact, in classic Anakin sense, like the same way we see him blinded to everything else but Clovis in the banking arc, which almost gets Padme and him killed in that episode. He's just, that's Anakin, and it's a fault of his character. In fact, Obi-Wan's been trying to point this out to him the whole time. It's a fault of your character that he's so single-mindedly focused on these things. And so, in fact, the Emperor even points that out when he says, perhaps your feelings for your old master have left you weakened. If your past cannot be overcome, he's threatening Anakin. Like, if you can't let this go, I might not have any uses for you anymore.
It doesn't change that the chase scene.
No, I think that the chase scene just, to me, works better in that. I will concede, though, it could have been edited much better. So, and made to work better. But I still think it works thematically.
Okay, let me throw the flag here. So we're saying the same thing. You just feel you're saying it nicer than I am.
I'm saying that I think that I'm walking the line of saying I think that thematically it all works. I am going to agree with you, and I just don't think it's the worst chase sequence since The Last Jedi, because I think it works better than that, because at least it feels more thematically ingrained with the rest of the series.
I didn't say it was as bad as the chase scene from The Last Jedi. I said it's the worst since. That's all I'm saying.
I get what you're saying. I wouldn't even put it in the same category. That's just that maybe we're just quibbling about details now. So
I think we are. I think we are.
So, but I think though that, and you mentioned at the beginning, John, having Vader back and bringing back Hayden, I think is one of the best ideas that they had for this show, because his portrayal is phenomenal in the suit, and you can just tell it's Anakin. And and then on top of that, the voice work they did with James Earl Jones' voice to make it sound like the Vader that we are used to from the original series. Hands down, the best thing they did in this show, honestly. Like, it's so good, especially having just watched episode 4. It's like, it fits perfectly.
But see, that's the thing, is just to shore that up. He sounds like the Vader from episode 4. Yes. Because there is a vocal difference between the Vader in Empire and Jedi from the Vader in episode 4. So that attention to detail, I think, is great, and unfortunately does put me in the camp of people that says, okay, special edition of Rogue One, where they do that to his lines right there, because I
100% agree.
I think it would work even better. Even better. So
they should special edition that.
So speaking about my favorite character now, Vader has always been the character that I love the most in Star Wars, and then Leia second. But I've always loved Vader because he has such presence, and having him back, I absolutely agree with you both, was the strongest thing that they did for this show, aside from obviously bringing back Ewan. And I will throw in getting to see at Star Wars Celebration this year in person, Hayden and Ewan on the Star Wars live stage, where we were only a few feet away from them, and Hayden saying, "This is where the fun begins." People freaked out. I mean, awesome. It was so good. And it was so good to see him feeling the love from all of that as well. Yeah. So having him back was amazing. I think that having the flashbacks to him and showing what his motivations were again was so helpful. I'm sure, especially for the people that aren't as familiar with all of the other stuff in Star Wars. And then, I think that the fights were cool, and getting to then see him and Palpatine speaking. And that was where, when you mentioned, Matt, the line where Palpatine says, "If your past cannot be overcome," I did have an issue with that, just because Palpatine has said before, "Let your hate fuel you," or maybe a different version of the same words, but it was the Sith's attachment to vengeance and to things in their past that drove them to continue to go down the path to the dark side. Whereas the Jedi's whole thing was letting go. So I don't understand why he would have told Anakin that he needs to let it go. You get what I mean?
I think it's because this obsession with Kenobi is clouding Anakin to what the Emperor wants.
Okay.
Right? Like,
that's like a side quest.
Yeah, exactly. It's a side quest that he doesn't want him on, because it's distracting him from the mission that the Master has for him. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's a control thing, and Palpatine is, to me, asserting a control again and saying, you either let this go or I might have to kill you.
I think Christy has a fair point, though, because maybe it's just the writing of the line, right? Of, you need to stop chasing Kenobi, right? You need to stop being obsessed with that. We have other business to attend to. Let me worry about that. And that way we can set up the second season of Kenobi right there, where it's like, I'll send the Inquisitors out. You send the Inquisitors after them. Let them worry about that. Mm-hmm. You worry about you. I think that basically, Christy, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're just saying that could have been cleaner. That could have been stated a little bit more cleanly, and it would have alleviated some of that quibble, right?
Yeah, the words they used are what I have an issue with.
And I think that's fair.
He said if your past cannot be overcome. I'm like, well, but that kind of helps him.
Right. The anger that he feeds on is what makes him Vader.
Yeah.
He's supposed to remain like really pissed about everything. And that helps, to dwell on things that you feel you've been wronged about. We all know people like that, where it's like that comes to define their character sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's useful to the Emperor. But, so, I mean, the thing is, like, I just, I think it's a fair point. Matt, I know what you're saying. I know that's what they were going for, but it's just another one of those things where sandy edges.
I just disagree with you both because I don't, he's saying perhaps your old feelings for your master have left you weakened, and that this obsession with Kenobi, I think what he's saying is that if you can't overcome that, you're never going to be as strong as you could be. And I think it's also the thing that to me helps make sense as to why Vader just drops Kenobi. Like, he drops the subject and he never searches for him again because it's a sign of weakness to his master. And that's what I'm getting at. Like, that's what I think the Emperor saying, and that's why he's saying he wants him to overcome it. And Christy, I think you raise an interesting point, but again, I bring this back to that the Emperor is saying, this is not about Sith theology. This is about what the Emperor wants. So
and I could see it from that perspective. Yeah, so I get that.
To me, that's where I took it. So, but I, what I'm, so I think that's a good question though. I mean, it is a good question because it does seem like Sith theology basically would be to fuel your hatred and continue after whatever obsession you have, regardless of the cost, basically, because that's what drives you.
I mean, the thing is, if anything, to Christy's point, it would have been nicer to hear, and it would have, I think, buttoned it up to have Palpatine say, obviously you can't handle him. So let's send other people after him because obviously your feelings for him leave you weak and you can't possibly ever beat him. That would get under Anakin's, what's left of Anakin's skin and would piss him off.
Yep.
Yeah. Prey on the ego.
It's a great point for just because of the sense that where it's we keep kind of saying the writing could be cleaner. Yeah. I do love, personally, Kenobi teaches Anakin one more lesson. And it's the lesson he's been trying to teach him over and over and over again. And Anakin just doesn't get it, So I had no problem with him getting schooled one more time. So, okay. A couple of things we have to hit. I know we're running really long, but obviously we've had a ton to talk about in this show. And I think we've had great back and forth. We have talked a lot about the editing and the look and the feel of this show. And so I did want to get into some of that. And just quickly, I'll lay it out here for me. I think this show needed a better DP, better choices in filming in the sense that there's way too much shaky cam.
Yep.
The fights, you just don't really get to see the intricacy of the work that they're putting into these fights. And the fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan is so cool on that planet. And yet, unless you watch it a few times, you're missing a lot of stuff because of the way it's shot. And I'm also disappointed that this show should have been premiere television in the sense that it should feel Game of Thrones, final season level when it comes to production. And this show doesn't feel like that. It should feel like a Star Wars story level solo movie or Rogue One every week. But the level of effects is not there. And I 100% agree with you, John, that a lot of the issues that we got in the show could have actually just been fixed in the editing bay with somebody who I think has a little bit more Star Wars sense when it comes to Star Wars editing and Star Wars storytelling. I think of the editors we got on the animated stories who are able to tell concise, clear Star Wars stories in 22 minutes. And I feel like, and part of that is just by them jerry-rigging scenes, cutting here, moving here, I think all that stuff is the stuff, and like you mentioned, George talking about, that's it's made in the editing bay. A lot of the issues that I have with the show, I think, with somebody who has a stronger Star Wars storytelling sense, could have made and ameliorated a lot of the things that we've discussed.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add on to that is I would never use the phrase a better DP, but when you have Greig Fraser, who is arguably one of the best directors of photography working out there today, usher in the era of the volume, with The Mandalorian, you've set a very high bar. And you should have like a crash course sort of situation where it's like, okay, hey, congratulations, you got hired. Let's show you everything that we learned and how we overcame that to help you make the most of what is happening here. And I just, that's where I go with it. Is I'd say it's incumbent upon the production staff to provide that type of support to the new people coming on board, so that those of us who have been spoiled by them coming out of the gate so strong with this new technology, it is absolutely no different than after the original trilogy was done. Every other movie we went to that used blue screen, we were like, oh, well, that's not as good as that, right? And it's like that they've set up their own thing where they have to be very conscious of that. We had the same sort of problem with the shooting in Book of Boba Fett, where it was like, oh, remember that chase scene through, you know what? That one was worse. Okay. That one, the speeder bike chase with the mods in Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah, that was terrible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That one was the worst chase scene since The Last Jedi. So,
okay.
I'll amend my earlier comment.
Although the one in the woods with Leia and the three dudes is close. Because if you re-edited that, it'd be fine. But again, it's just...
Trim it down to 30 seconds and everybody's happy.
Exactly.
Yeah. So...
Yeah, I will add, I also was a little surprised that they went with someone that's not as familiar. Like, I do wish, like you said, John, that they had Greig or someone similar to doing the way that they did it, like with Mandalorian, because it was so beautifully done there. And I feel like really had that larger than life feel, like you want to have like a Dune feel or something, and you just didn't get that here. And the person that did do the cinematography on Kenobi, the two big things I saw that he's done otherwise were Zombieland Double Tap and Uncharted, both of which have a very specific style, but don't necessarily jive with how you would style a Star Wars show.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that definitely, you're right, Matt. There was too much shaky cam. And I think that affected people's enjoyment, especially of the Kenobi Vader fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also just had to, I'll mention one thing too, where, like on Dayu, where they go and this place is supposed to be super seedy and, it just felt so blasé. Like everybody in the background, actors, I don't know if it's a COVID thing that they were dealing with, could have been, but it just didn't feel like the place that you go that, what it needed to feel like was in Blade Runner 2049, when he goes to the Replimat area and is eating, and there's just all of this crazy stuff happening behind him that's seedy and awful, and you could feel it behind the walls, it's just crawling with, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. And this place just felt like, there's some people like gambling on the street, people just kind of milling about, random person comes up and offers you some spice. It just didn't have. So there were some places like that where too, like the production just didn't feel as heightened as it should have been. So one last thing before we get to the ratings, I wanted to just ask you, obviously John Williams writes a theme for Kenobi, and then Natalie Holt does the score. What are your thoughts on that, specifically since, John, you mentioned The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett both put their stamp in the sense of the sound that they're going for, created Star Wars sounds in their own sound. here with Kenobi, you're obviously connecting much more with the films. What'd you think of the theme, and how did the score work for you?
Theme was fine. I thought that the score was not particularly memorable. And, that's fine. That's okay. Not everything needs to be, earth-shattering, but I would have appreciated something. Again, this is the trap. The Mandalorian came out of the gate so strong that you go back to that, and it's like I still listen to that soundtrack. And it's not just the theme, but I listen to the actual soundtrack. And I don't really hear anything that's going to make me rush out for the Kenobi soundtrack and be like, yeah, I got to have this in my collection. I'll probably get around to it eventually, but it's like, it was fine.
So I kind of felt like maybe out the gate, it's a little unfair to Natalie being put in the position of having to follow Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett as far as scores go. And then also, I think you have so much more history here to where you can't necessarily go in a completely new direction sound-wise for Kenobi, because so much was established in the films already for him. But, I will say, maybe also it was that she felt she had to keep things consistent. And there were still some things that were specifically references back to John Williams. So I don't know. I can definitely tell that maybe she's playing it a little safe, and that there is not a very recognizable personal stamp on Kenobi's score the way that there is for like Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. So I guess that's my way of defending maybe why it's different, but I could see still how it could be better, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with both of you. I really like the theme that Williams created for Obi-Wan, in the sense of creating it for the Obi-Wan that we got in this series, because it's melancholy, but it gives a sense of maybe hope of where the character is going to go. I'm definitely disappointed in the soundtrack by Holtz. I think there were plenty of places for her to use Star Wars music beyond, say, like the Force theme or something that shouldn't be introduced until like those moments where Kenobi's starting to feel that back, and it's like she felt restrained from ever really using a lot of that until like the final episode. It was really disappointing. Not even to hear strains of like Battle of Heroes in there. Like that seems like a mistake to me. So, and it's also that she's following Solo, where John Powell found a way, I felt like, to integrate all of those themes of Star Wars action music into what he was doing there and make it feel really natural. And a lot of the action music here just kind of felt like everyday action music. So, it's just another place where I just felt like I wish there had been some refinement to the whole thing. So, in the end, after 2 hours, I'm really interested. Where do we get for our ratings for Kenobi? So, John, you are our guest and our curmudgeon. Where are you?
3 out of 5. Good, but not great. And will I rewatch it? Sure. But that's where I end with it right now. 3.
3 what, though? What are you rating with?
Oh, I don't know. 3 broken Vader helmets.
I'm trying to give you a little hope.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm similar, but I give it a 3.5, just because there were still some things that it regained points back for me for. A big one being Hayden being back, and then all the cuteness with Leia. But and I forgot to mention Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers being the villain at one time.
Yeah.
That was funny. But yeah, I think that, like we've said, there were just some things that could have been tightened up editing wise or cinematography wise, and then dialogue that could have been tweaked to be so much better than what we got. And I think that also we had high expectations, which, I mean, why wouldn't you at this point? We've been waiting for so long to get this story told. So I kind of hope there is a season 2 to maybe get some redemption a little bit from some of the things here that we were bothered by.
Yeah, I will say that for me, obviously, I think everybody can tell that I am very mixed in the sense of like the complete execution of the story. But for myself, when I look at the why of the story being Kenobi moving from Shattered to Jedi again, I think that story is told pretty well. I think it's all the stuff around that isn't quite as well told. And for that, I will say I would give this 4 out of 5. And I wanted this to be the perfect show. I probably more than anybody else I know, just because of what this character means to me. But yeah, it's there's so many places where the execution on the show is just missing something, you know? And what I think it is it's missing the fact that I would have rather them have spent 2 more years putting everything together, script-wise, and then coming out with the perfect show than this. But this is, I just got to judge what we got, and I like it and almost love it enough, even though I'm still frustrated. And so, yeah, in the end, I give this 4 out of 5 shaky cam lightsaber fights. So, John, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this. And everybody, it's in the bylaws. You have to be here for the Star Wars shows like this. But where can people find you if they want to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on?
Just look for Kessel Junkie out there, KESSELJUNKIE, and I'm on 2 shows over on the Nerd Party. One of them is called House Lights, where we look at the work of directors, divided up into really some interesting sort of categories and approaches that we have. It's a lot of fun. And you can also find me on a Star Wars podcast called Aggressive Negotiations that is co-hosted by one Matthew Rushing, who you've heard for the last 2 hours now.
Yeah. I don't know if they're lucky about that, or anyway. Christy, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Bespin Bell. And of course, when I am not here, I do a show called Sabers and Spells with my friends Amanda and Teresa on the Skywalking Through Neverland network, talking about weird, geeky things we don't usually get to talk about. But what about you, Matt?
Well, you can find me all over social media under Matt Rushing02, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero, all of those kind of things. Of course, here on the network, you can find me doing Literary Treks, which is about the books and the comics of Star Trek, The Orb, about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, The Artificial Tango, about Star Trek Picard, Saddle Up, about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and The Orb, about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And then when I wasn't doing Aggressive Negotiations on the Nerd Party Network with John, you could find me on a completed show with Drea Kaufman called Owl Post, and we talked through every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, 1 chapter at a time. But as always, thank you so much for joining us.
And may the Force be with you.
Thank you.